everyone, and welcome to August's Book Nook. My name is Jordan H. Bartlett, author of Contest of Queens, Queen's Catacombs, and the upcoming Queendom Come, which comes out March 2025. And I am joined today by Jeffrey Gardner, author of The Path from Regret, which came out in 2023, and The Magic of Deceit, which I will show here, which we're going to talk about today, that came out June this year, so it's fresh off the press. Welcome, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Jordan. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, and I'm so excited to get stuck in. The theme of today is magic and Malady. So we're going to talk a lot about magic systems. Strap in. And first things first, before we dive straight in, I would like to hear a little bit about yourself. So can you tell me about yourself and about the magic of deceit?
Sure. So my name is Jeffrey Gardner. My day job is a microbiologist. I lead a research group looking at ways to treat fungal infections. And then at night and on weekends, I am a fantasy author. So I've written the two books you mentioned, and I think a lot about magic, wizards, and dragons.
Wonderful. Great pastime. And I like to think that the fungal infection piece probably plays into a lot of pieces in the magic and fantasy world because fungus are wild. They don't quite seem real.
I use a lot of what it's like in my academic world and in my day job into the magic system and kind of the archive. That's the place where the magic happens in the books.
Perfect. And then can you tell us a little bit about the magic of deceit?
Sure. So for the magic of deceit, if I had to give it a one sentence logline summary, I would say a wizard seeking distinction from his guild is targeted for assassination as he searches for a powerful merchant's kidnapped daughter. And so for that, it starts out with the main character. His name is Thorn. He is a wizard, and he's part of a somewhat secret program that is trying to weaponize magic. So right now in the story that I've created, magic is benign or helpful, but there's a small faction that wants to see some type of military use for it. So he's part of this pilot program. But for reasons we can talk about in a little bit, he's kind of a lesser mage for a couple of different reasons. And so while he's doing kind of menial courier tasks for the archive, his colleagues are very influential agents throughout the world, and he wants to be a part of that. And what happens is a farmer from the frontier comes with a problem. His wife has been kidnapped, and really no one at the archive where Thorn is really cares. And he thinks this is an opportunity where he can prove himself, prove his value. And so he takes it upon himself to go and help this farmer find his wife. And the story kind of takes off from there.
I love it. And there's so many kind of interwoven factors in this novel. It's kind of like a blink and you miss it type story, which I love because then you really feel smart when you're following all the little side threads outside of this main plot line. What I really love about this world and what struck me is it kind of made me think of there was probably a moment when our world invented gunpowder for fireworks. And it was like, this is great. And then there's that transition of, but we can also make guns. So the way your magic system seems to be set up when I was reading it is you're right before we go full blown, we can weaponize this. So it's kind of like the growing pains and the, oh, what else can we do with this? So tell us about the magic system that you created and how it impacts all of the different characters, or maybe just the main characters.
Sure. So this is something that I love to talk about, so you might need to rein me in. So the two aspects of the magic system I really want to talk about first is the idea that wizards in the world, they're part of a tripod of power. So there's the archive where the magical innovation happens. There is the merchant guilds where the economy and the commerce happens, and then there are the ruling princes who control the military. So those are kind of the three parties vying for power. And the wizards, they I would say it's not awesome to be a wizard. And the reason it's not awesome to be a wizard is because the ability to use magic in the system that I've created is a chronic and ultimately fatal disease. And it's called the Iron Bane. And every wizard is affected by this Iron Bane disease, and it progresses throughout their life. And it manifests in the destruction of your five senses. So your hearing, your taste, your smell, your touch, those start to erode and lessen and degrade in a chronic fashion, it cannot be healed, it cannot be repaired, and it is ultimately fatal. All wizards always will die from this ironbane disease. And in fact, the main antagonist of the book, that's already happening to her. In fact, that her vision is relatively poor because of this ironbane disease. And so that's kind of one aspect I think is really interesting, is what are the costs to be a wizard, or what are you giving up for this magical ability? And the other aspect I like to think about or talk about is the two types of wizards there are in the world. And there are those that are born or innately have this ability to use magic, and there are those that are made. And I think this makes my story a little bit unique from those that you might read typically, because in typical stories or standard stories or stories you've read before, magic is a blessing. It's this ultra rare thing where you are a chosen one and now you can use this certain type of magic. In the world that I've created, there's no such thing as a chosen one. Anyone can become a wizard. They can have their mind unlocked to magic, but very, very few do, because of this chronic disease, this iron bane. So if you're a born wizard, an innate wizard, that's what I kind of consider the sad class of wizard, because you are born with this, your fate is sealed. You need to learn to manage your magic, manage the erosion of uh, your five senses and of your life before it ultimately kills you. For the people that choose to become wizards, you need to ask why. It is well known that this disease manifests and it is a fatal outcome. What would make someone choose to become a wizard? And it's not a spoiler. Thorn is one of those people that chose to have his mind unlocked. Why would he do this to himself? And what does that say about him as a person? So those are kind of the things that I like to think about, and which is kind of far away from the fireballs and lightning bolts and flying and all the kind of the D&D style stuff people think of as magic. There's not a lot of that in the magic system that I've created. It's much more kind of grounded in what is plausible by chemistry and physics, and that again kind of ties back to my academic training. It's a bending of a rule of nature, of a law of nature, and not a complete breakage. So
Oh, I love that, because it really is the sense of, with great power comes great, not responsibility fully, it's also with great cost and
consequence, absolutely.
consequence. Yeah. And it really sets up, because Thorn is such an interesting character in that he, like you say, he has unlocked his magic. It sets up an interesting dynamic, because there's almost like a like when you first see him interacting with the born wizards, there's a lot of prejudice and resentment. And I know when I was first reading it, I was like, oh, is it because they think he's like lesser than? But then when you have that spin on it, it's not so much that, it's more like you had the ability and the opportunity to be well and healthy, and you threw that away. So it's almost like a bitterness. It's a very cool kind of insight into human psychology, how the different types of wizards interact with one another. And I want to chat a little bit more about Thorn, because he's fantastic. Because his magic is unlocked, we have that sense that not all magic users are equal. So, what role would you say belonging has in your novel, and how does it affect Thorn's character as he moves through the plot?
No, absolutely. I think that's a really great question, and a neat thing to tease apart if you're looking for that in the story. You could pass over it if you're not just going to focus on the chase, trying to find the kidnapped person. But in Thorn's case, I think this was an interesting moment because he's he wants to be seen as kind of the stock character, the competent man. He wants to be the character that can do magic as well as the born mages, can do all of the feats and skills again. So he works very, very hard in a technical aspect to be a powerful, strong wizard. But what he completely misses is the social aspect. And so there's several instances when he's at the archive and people are trying to reach out and make a personal connection with him. He completely blows them off because he doesn't understand kind of social capital or social power. He understands technical power. So he works very hard to become a very skilled wizard, but he's not working very hard to become a skilled person. And that is kind of where that tiering comes in. So he wants to belong. He wants to be seen as a strong wizard, but he completely misses maybe the most powerful way to do that. And there's a scene maybe in the first third of the book where he hamstrings himself. He and the farmer have to join a pilgrimage caravan, and while the pilgrimage caravan is going about their daily tasks, Thorn makes an effort to take a small keg, go to the edge of the camp, set it down, and sit and be alone and be solitary and distant from the group. He doesn't want to be part of the group. And the leader of the caravan notices this and comes over to him and says, "Do you ever tire of being an outsider?" And so that's, I think, an aspect of Thorn consciously always pushing people away or always wanting to stand alone, but at the same time wanting to belong. So he's hamstringing himself, and so the sense of why is he doing that? Why is he isolating himself? And you get some hints of that in this book, the Magic of Deceit. But that idea of why does he isolate himself, and why did he become a wizard? Why did he, like you said, throw his health and his future away to become a wizard? That's explored much more fully in The Path from Regret.
Oh, incredible. And it is, I really loved that caravan because there were kind of two scenes almost back to back with uh Essen, the farmer, and Thorn, where Essen is so, because he's used to living on the land, and also like community is like safety. Community is uh being able to make it through the winter. So, when they go to the pub, Essen's much more willing to try and fit in and be a part of the group, whereas Thorn makes it almost like a challenge to himself of how can I tick off as many people who approach me so that I get kicked out of here. And then with the pilgrimage too, you've got, Essen who's got all the customs down, and he's like, no, we have to stop this quest that's very important to me to be a part of this caravan. And Thorn almost, it's almost like he has this like disregard or like condescension to those who need others. So it's wonderful that you've paired him with Essen, who is so aware that no, others are so important to how we continue to be alive in this world. Because then you get kind of a forced, like, okay, now you have to come play with me and my friends because you're with me.
No, and that's exactly right, and that's maybe kind of the classic story or the classic trope of the outsider or the person that's isolated realizing they need friends, family,
Yeah.
community.
All right, and you brought up D&D before. Everybody knows if you make a lone wolf character, it's never going to work with the party dynamic.
Right, that's right. So, like you said in some of your previous podcasts, don't split the party.
Don't split the party. Yeah. So, what kind of rules did you create for your magic, and how did you keep that
So
power
that's
balance?
another great question. So now we can kind of talk more about the nuances of the magic system. So in the story that I've created, there's really it's the four classical elements. So it's fire, water, earth, air, and then I've added in gravity as a kind of a fifth element. So those are the things you can manipulate. So I've made it what I'm trying to do is make it be a hard or a harder system. And so I guess when talking about hard and soft magic systems, the hard systems that would be like the Legend of Korra or Avatar: The Last Airbender. Everyone in the audience understands what the rules are. The fire users can't use water, and etc. So, or Full Metal Alchemist, where there's certain rules that everyone kind of accepts and understands, and that the opposite would be a soft magic system, which would be like Star Wars. No one really kind of knows what the Force is. It whatever the plot needs, that's what it does. Or Lord of the Rings. Again, Gandalf's powers is because Gandalf can do it because he's a wizard. So that's a softer system, which is more mysticism. So I wanted to have kind of a harder magic system where the rules were more or less understood and fixed, and you couldn't fudge your way through. I think for a magic system, for me, it's more interesting if you have fewer powers or fewer abilities because then you have to get creative with them. If you can do anything, then you can magic away, wave your wand, and then the problem goes away, and that makes things, there's very few stakes and it's not interesting. But if you can only do one or two things with your magic, you'll become very clever in how to maximize that talent. In terms of thinking about magic levels, the wizards in the world that I've created are actually really kind of underpowered. They're not very strong, and one of the reasons for that is as part of the Iron Bane, one of the detriments of being a wizard is a sensitivity or a weakness to iron, meaning that if iron touches your skin, you get this severe, blistering third-degree type burn, which is why if you got shot with an arrow or stabbed with a knife, it's almost instantly fatal because not only are you suffering from the physical wound, but your body is aversely being reacted to the metal with the magic in that's pervading your body. So
Yeah, and I love what you said about having a few powers that so you have to be creative, and it made me think of the film Chronicle by Max Landis. Have you seen that one? And I
yes,
think the only power that the boys get is telekinesis, but then they figure out how they can use telekinesis to fly or how they
yeah,
can use so it's kind of more interesting because then you're like, "Oh, you had this one little power and then you did all this with it," rather than, like you say, Gandalf being able to just cause lightning when the plot needs lightning or whisper to the
ex-
birds.
exactly. And I think the other thing is proximity. So a lot of times when you again kind of pulling tropes from D&D, you could do media or meteor swarm where you have this huge area of effects type of thing, and it's very distant. The wizards that I've got, everything's very proximal. And so, for example, there's another scene where they're going to get on a ship, and the captain of the ship says, "Well, can you whip me up a wind or create me a squall where we can move faster?" And Thorn says, "No, magic doesn't work that way. Everything's very proximal. I don't have the power to fill an entire sail and carry us across for this journey. I can create some wind, but it's going to be very short lived." And again, that creates a system where you have to be very clever with how you're using your powers because the range is very short.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's more satisfying to read too because it's kind of like you are rooting for it almost makes magic more of an underdog piece because it's not, God moded.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love how you did that. And what advice would you give to other writers who are hoping to create their own magic system?
So this is not advice. This is my wish list for stuff that I like, and I wrote the book, I guess, for me. So I'm the best audience for my stories. So I wanted to read stuff similar to that. So what am I looking for? I would like things that are kind of harder than softer systems. So there's more defined rules. I would like things that are kind of underpowered because what I think is more interesting is not the power itself, but the implementation of it. I want to be able to read a story and say, "Oh, that's clever. That's a neat way to do that," or "I hadn't thought of that." So I'd say make your magic uh, less is more. So make it so that your characters are clever, not that your magic is super OP.
I love that. Yeah, totally. And it's even like you mentioned Avatar: The Last Airbender, which, oh my gosh, I could go for hours talking about that show. But what I love with that magic system too is they slowly unlock different ways to use. Like water is first just water, and then it's like you can do steam, you can do blood, you can do water in the plants. Like there's all these little things, like you say, that really also help flavor the world. And that's where, like, with your magic, because there's that malady that comes with being powerful, there's all these little things that the characters will do to also protect themselves. So it's like it's an interesting balance of power and then like self-preservation. Like I can't push myself so far because it will impact me in the long run.
And that was something that I like to think about in terms of what's the reserve. And so for lack of a better term in the story, I called it mana, the arcane energy that a user expends to actually do the magic. And in typical stories, there's some cost. You either get tired or sleepy and you need to rest. And so I didn't have that, but I again kind of thought about, well, what would it be, if you're going to move a pile of cinder blocks across the yard. You're going to be fatigued, but you're not going to be sleepy. So what are you going to need? You're going to need to eat. You're going to be hungry and thirsty, and so that's the replenishment that I have in the story. So if an arcane wizard, they constantly need to be eating or drinking, and so that is kind of a minor point in the story. Thorn's really kind of weakened for much of the novel because he's on the run and he can't eat regularly. So the cafeteria is actually the most important part of the archive. And that's not only a social place, which Thorn completely misses again, but it's the place where the wizards get their nourishment that actually powers their magic.
Hmm. Yeah, and then can you tell me something that you really geek out about that you've inserted in your novel?
I'll say it's across the novels, or what I've planned for across the novels. And so you already touched upon it. It's the evolution of the magic. And so what I think is neat, or what I'm planning, and I think it's neat that you don't see, like again, for Harry Potter, or for really kind of any standard fantasy, you might come across, you have your base series of skills or spells, and then you might read a scroll. So you personally learn a new spell or a new skill, but someone already developed it. In the case of Harry Potter, you learn the stuff that already came before. There's no development, there's no invention. And so, what I've tried to do in the Magic of Deceit and in the Path from the Regret is showing what does magical invention look like. And so, towards the back end of the story, Thorn is he's in some crypt, he's alone, he's training, and he accidentally learns a new combat maneuver using magic. And he says, "This was a mistake, but I can use it." And so that idea of how does magical innovation, how does the invention take place, that slow progression of progress, and you think about so science and technology, that's that slow march forward as the years go by. And so what I'm trying to do in the books that I write is that Thorn does not necessarily get incrementally more powerful, which is you always worry about power levering in novels. He doesn't incrementally more powerful, but the tools he gets evolves. So he might not be a more powerful wizard, but his toolbox gets more diverse because he invents things that he can use. And so if you look at the skills he has in the Magic of Deceit and the skills he has from the Path from Regret, that's a 20-year gap in time. And to say that he's got the exact same skills is kind of silly because he's going to grow and develop in those years. So the techniques and methods he uses is very different. And so I wanted to show what does that invention look like, and how would he share that invention with others if he chose to do so. So what I like to geek out and think about is when you think about science and technology, what's you go from iPod to iPhone to the VR goggles. And so whatever you want to have as your goalposts or your milestones for technology or innovation for science, same thing for magic. What would it take for that innovation to happen? So I like to think about that and make sure that's part of the stories that I tell, because you don't often see that. It's always retroactive in terms like, oh, I found a new skill, so now I can do the meteor swarm that I was talking about a while ago. I couldn't do it before, now I can't. But someone had to develop that spell. I want to hear the origin story of the development of meteor swarm. Where did that come from? And so that's what I'm trying to do here.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And it really does ground your magical world in a very real way that humans are, in a very real way that, like you say, discovery, technology, civilization is, because we are in a constant state of flux and a constant state of change, and usually that change is in one direction. So that's so great that you have in your mind where you're starting from and then how you want to progress that through your series. That's so clever. And do you have a favorite quote or passage from your novel that you can share with us?
I do. So for both of my books, the things that I like the best, I put on as the quotes for the cover. So for the Path from Regret, the quote was, "Only some scars fade," and then that was a sense of emotional scars, not physical scars. And in the case of the Magic from Deceit, the quote was, "With all of your power, what could you possibly fear?" And so the quote itself, that's not my favorite part, because that is a question that Essen asks Thorn, because Thorn is talking about his time at the archive, and he's very loyal to the archive, and it's a place where he really wants to belong, kind of going back to what we were talking about before. And Thorin says, well, the archive is a place where I can channel my fear, channel my anger. And that's where the quote comes in, because Essen asks, well, with all of your powers, seeing what Thorin can do, what can you possibly fear? And Thorin's answer is one of the few times he's truly vulnerable in the story, emotionally available, emotionally vulnerable in the story, because he says, I'm afraid of being a disappointment. I'm afraid of being forgotten. So those that and then it snaps closed again, and you don't really see that vulnerability again. But that's a very small moment where Thorin, you really see what drives him forward, and it's the fear of being seen as not the competent man, as being so mediocre as to be forgotten, and that really drives who he wants to be.
And I think that's what really makes him so relatable too, because so many of us have that fear, like, I am not enough, like that imposter syndrome. You know, you start a new job and it's like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. Everyone's going to notice. So it makes him so relatable. And then we also see, like, if he continues to kind of nurture that fear, then he's going to keep closing himself off, keep separating, and he'll never actually be able to do the thing he fears he won't be able to do, which is be important to people and have a lasting impression on this world. So it's an interesting one, and it's so nuanced because the thing that he fears is the thing that he is going to, like, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly, and that's what I thought was kind of interesting because the thing he wants so bad, he is actively slowing down
Mm-hmm.
because again, he focuses so much on the things that he's good at. He's good at the magic, but he's not good at people. And again, kind of classic adult learning. You're going to keep doing the thing you're good at and not work so hard at the thing you're not, especially if it's a struggle and you feel bad doing it. So that's why, and I think that works for him in his 20s because the story is kind of set when he's kind of you know early on adulthood, and in the path from regret at this point he's 40. So things have changed for him. Not all of them have been awesome, but you see that progression in kind of personality between stories as well. And so that's another part that I wanted to try, not only the evolution of the magic system or the invention of magic, but the evolution of kind of a one character. And so a quote whose attribution I can't remember, but it's basically the gist of it is how I thought in my 50s is very different than how I thought in my 30s. And that's the way it should be. Otherwise, I would have wasted 20 years of my life.
Yeah,
So there needs to be kind of that progression.
very true. Oh, I love that. And so what projects are coming up next for you?
Sure, I've got a couple of different things going, and so the most the next thing that will be published is I was fortunate enough to be invited for an anthology. So Canadian author Edward Willett, he also has a podcast, and he's published 5 anthologies of previous guests from his show. That the anthology is called The World Shapers, and for the volume 5 of this World Shapers anthology, I've got a short story that's going to be in there. And it goes into kind of Thorne's origin. So, how was he admitted into the archive? What were the evaluations that were required for him to go in? And seeing the effects of the Iron Vein, seeing these wizards whose minds and bodies are destroyed, how does that influence his decision? Well, you already kind of know the decision, but what does that do to others in his cohort that are all trying to become these made mages? So that anthology will be coming out in early 2025, and I'm currently drafting what is, I guess, technically book 2 in the series. So it happens when Thorin's in his 30s, and so we're hoping to see that sometime in 2026. The goal for the books, my original vision, and I'm still being able to stick to that, is that of this 4-book series, it's going to be a major event in Thorne's life for each decade. So 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s.
Very exciting, very exciting. And where can we find you online so we don't miss any of these upcoming pieces?
Sure. So the best place to find me is on my website, which is jgardnerauthor.com. That's got purchase links for the books. It's got Goodreads links. So if you wanted to see what other people are saying before you dive in, it's got all my media stuff for. So the link for this podcast interview will be there very shortly. And then once a month, I do an update. I'm reluctant to call it a blog, but it has my writing progress for my current projects, and every once in a while some thoughts about the successes and kind of the ups and downs of trying to write fantasy novels, and you can find that in that section as well.
Wonderful. Okay, so what I'll do is I will put that link in the description, in my newsletter, in the little doobly-doo thing down below, and you can follow that, no problem. But thank you so much for joining me today. This has been such a treat talking all things magic with you.
Thank you very much. This has been a great chat.
Oh, wonderful. Well, hopefully I'll get to chat with you for when the next one comes out. And in the meantime, thank you so much to all the listeners and watchers who have joined our chat as well. If you've liked what you heard, please take a minute to rate and follow this podcast or share with a like-minded friend. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. If you liked it on Spotify, please follow me because I release a new episode every month and there's no set date. So if you've been following, then you don't miss anything. However you wound up here, I hope you're well and living magically.